The Battle of Sekigahara, fought October 21st, 1600. It stands as one of Japan's most decisive and transformative conflicts, effectively shaping the nation's politics for centuries to come. Occurring in the heart of Sekigahara in present-day Gifu province, this monumental battle was the culmination of escalating tensions among various daimyo, or feudal lords, vying for supremacy following the tumultuous Sengoku period, a time marked by incessant civil wars and shifting alliances. The conflict pitted the forces loyal to Tokugawa Ieyasu against those aligned with Ishida Mitsunari, the leader of the Western Army, who sought to maintain the existing power structure under the legacy of Toyotomi Hideyoshi. Demonstrating strategic brilliance and securing strategic defections from allied clans, Tokugawa Ieyasu emerged victorious, decisively defeating the Western Army. It was this triumph that paved the way for the establishment of the Tokugawa Shogunate, ushering in the new Edo period, a prolonged era of peace, stability, but also isolation that would see Japan lock itself away for almost 250 years. And thus the Battle of Sekigahara not only marked the end of the widespread feudal warfares that dominated Japan, but also solidified the dominance of Tokugawa, laying the foundational framework for modern Japan's social and political structure. It carries a legacy that is deeply ingrained in the Japanese identity, symbolizing the decisive shift from fragmented regional power to centralized governance. And of course it remains a pivotal reference point for anyone wanting to understand Japan's transition into a unified and enduringly stable nation. Welcome to the channel. A little bit of a different sort of video today about the Battle of Sekigahara. Now I already did videos a while back about Hideyoshi and Nobunaga, Tokugawa, several other samurais and daimyo lords, but I thought that I would do one specifically on the Battle of Sekigahara itself, just to hammer home how much of an important turning point this was. Now, as usual, if you want to support the channel, just click the few buttons, the like, comment, the subscribe, you know how it is. And enjoy the video. Let's get started. But before we do, you're probably going to hear a lot of names you might not recognize, so I'm going to briefly explain who the main players are, what their motivations were, and sometimes how they became involved in this conflict, because there are a lot of moving parts. Now, first of all, we have the leader of the Eastern Army, that being Tokugawa Ieyasu, and he was also, of course, the founder of the Tokugawa Shogunate. Ieyasu was driven by his desire to consolidate power following the death of Toyotomi Hideyoshi. Ultimately, his goal was to establish a stable and enduring shogunate under his family's control. And he knew what he was doing, too. He was a master strategist who understood the importance of alliances and politics, making him the architect of Japan's reunification after years of civil war. And then we have the other side. We have the leader of the Western Army, Ishida Mitsunari. Now, Mitsunari was a loyal retainer of Toyotomi Hideyoshi and sought to protect the clan's interests. After Hideyoshi's death and the chaos that followed, Mitsunari became one of the most prominent figures trying to prevent Tokugawa from usurping power. If it had gone the other way, we'd be making videos about the Toyotomi clan and the Toyotomi shogunate instead of the Tokugawa shogunate. Mitsunari was motivated by his pure loyalty to the legacy of Hideyoshi. and also his desire to preserve the power of the Toyotomi clan against what he viewed as Tokugawa overreach. So those are the two main players. But then we have a few other minor ones, as in we also have Tokugawa Hideyoshi, who was initially aligned with the Western Army, but defected to Tokugawa's side during the battle. Now, this was one of the turning points that really swung it in the favor of Ieyasu. Tokugawa had personal grievances against Ishida Mitsunari and was disgruntled with his treatment by Toyotomi Hideyoshi, making him susceptible, of course, to Tokugawa's persuasion. It probably didn't take too much, perhaps a few coins to grease the wheels. And thus Hideyoshi's motivations were largely shaped by this dissatisfaction with his previous standing, and of course the promise of rewards and favor from Ieyasu. And then we have the loyal commander under the Western Army, Ishida Mitsunari. Now, Hideye was motivated by his devotion to the Toyotomi clan, and unwaveringly so, having been a trusted ally for a long time of Toyotomi Hideyoshi. He faced, let's say, severe disadvantages at Sekigahara due to internal discord within his clan, resulting in a less effective fighting force, and so despite his commitment, his forces were eventually overwhelmed. Just another factor contributing to the collapse of the Western Army. Next we have Otani Yoshitsugu, a key Western Army general and another close ally of Mitsunari. Yoshitsugu was motivated by loyalty to the Toyotomi clan and a strong personal sense of camaraderie with Mitsunari. But the issue was, Yoshitsugu was suffering from illness. Despite that, well, I'm sure it affected his combat efficiency, but he certainly fought to the end, despite all of the physical limitations. And when eventually defeated and surrounded and seeing no way out, he took the path of the samurai in the traditional form and took his own life. Next we have Fukushima Masanori, one of the primary commanders in the Eastern Army. Masanori was originally a Toyotomi retainer, but he ended up siding with Tokugawa due to his discontent with Ishida Mitsunari. Masanori saw aligning with Ieyasu as a way to secure his position and ensure future prosperity, as well as to oppose Mitsunari, who personally he just did not like very much. Then we have Shimazu Yoshihiro, a commander in the Western Army. Yoshihiro was caught between loyalty to the Toyotomi clan and the realization that Tokugawa forces were pretty much going to win anyway, far too strong to fight against. Well, despite his valiant efforts in battle, Yoshihiro's troops suffered heavy losses. His motivation lay in preserving the honor of his family and clan, which ultimately led him to negotiate peace with Tokugawa after the Battle of Sekigahara to avoid total destruction. And finally, we have Naomasa, one of Ieyasu's most trusted generals and a member of the famed Four Heavenly Kings of Tokugawa. Naomasa fought fiercely for the Eastern Army. His motivations were tied to his loyalty to Ieyasu and his desire to be a key player in the new order that Ieyasu sought to create. His role in leading critical charges during the battle was a manifestation of this commitment to the Tokugawa cause, certainly leading by example. Of course, there's a lot more little characters in this, and unfortunately, all of those dead soldiers lying on the ground don't really get a mention, but, well, this video is not going to be that long. So, with all that in mind and the few characters introduced, let's talk about the conflict itself. Of course, we start with the lead-up in the years that followed the end of the Imjin War, and of course the passing of Toyotomi Hideyoshi. This of course finds Japan in this power struggle amongst its ruling elite. Tends to happen a lot when successions are not so, well, they're not so easy in these times. These internal conflicts were largely driven by the rivalry between Ishida Mitsunari and a group of Toyotomi loyalists, including Kato Kiyomasa, one of Hideyoshi's most prominent generals. Tensions came to a peak when Tokugawa began consolidating his power, gathering former Toyotomi allies such as Kiyomasa and Fukushima Masanori to his side. His goal was to counteract Mitsunari's efforts, who positioned himself as a protector of Toyotomi interests. The capital was rife with tension. Rumors of assassination attempts against Ieyasu spread like wildfire, and that's not the kind of rumors you want to hear. Well, if you're Ieyasu. Among these incidents was the accusation against one Toshinaga, the son of the influential Maeda Toshie, who was implicated in a supposed conspiracy to eliminate Ieyasu. This, of course, forced him into submission to him. Meanwhile, Uesugi Kagekatsu, a prominent daimyo and one of Hideyoshi's appointed regents, raised suspicions about his military build-up in the northern regions of Japan. Ieyasu demanded an explanation for Kagekatsu's apparent violation of the peace, formally questioning him from Kyoto. In response, Kagekatsu's chief retainer, Naoe Kanetsugu, composed a letter, and it was not a very nice one. It was reportedly filled with sarcasm at some points and open disdain at others, pointing out Ieyasu's own disregard for Hideyoshi's edicts and the perceived hypocrisy of his demands. One can imagine that Ieyasu did not receive this letter very well. Certainly does not do much to ease tensions. Patience running thin. Tensions mounting. Mitsunari began rallying his key supporters, notably Ankokuji Eke, Mashita Nagamori, Otani Yoshitsugu, to form a coalition aimed directly at opposing Ieyasu's growing influence. They decided to place Mori Terumoto at the head of this coalition, which became known as the Western Army. As their first strategic move, Terumoto swiftly marched to seize Osaka Castle, the symbol of Toyotomi authority, while Tokugawa forces were still occupied with suppressing Uesugi Kagekatsu in the north. Initially, Mitsunari devised a strategy to use Gifu Castle, under the command of Oda Hidenobu. That is the grandson of Oda Nobunaga, by the way. Do remember that the family names come first. So under the command of Oda Hidenobu and Ogaki Castle as defensive strongholds to hinder the advancement of the Eastern Army, Tokugawa's loyal coalition. However, these plans soon fell apart, and it was due to a series of significant setbacks. Now firstly, Gifu Castle, pretty formidable, was captured before the Western Army could properly fortify it. Fukushima Masanori and Ii Naomasa, leaders of the Eastern Army, attacked it with such speed and force that Hidenobu's forces crumbled, effectively caught off guard. There was no way they could respond in time, let alone wait for reinforcements. Secondly, on October the 19th, the forces of Shimazu Yoshihiro, who had been fighting for the Western Army, were defeated in an engagement near Sone Castle by the troops of Mizuno Katsunari. Following his victory, Katsunari went on to completely demolish the outer defenses of Okage Castle, forcing Yoshihiro to completely abandon the area and retreat into Ise province. Realizing the Eastern Army was now setting its sights on Osaka Castle, Mitsunari abandoned his initial plan of defensive warfare and resolved to face Ieyasu's forces in a brave, open battle. Mitsunari prepared for what would become one of Japan's most famous conflicts, Sekigahara. Both sides began to amass their troops, and Ieyasu spared absolutely no expense in acquiring very nice new equipment, matchlock firearms, Tanegashima as they called them, arming his soldiers for the inevitable confrontation. On the eve of battle, however, a significant betrayal unfolded that would tip the scales in favor of Tokugawa. Kikawa Hiroye, a commander under the Mori clan, who was aligned with the Western Army, secretly negotiated with the Eastern Army. In exchange for assurances of clemency, Hiroye promised that his contingent would defect to the Tokugawa side right in the heat of the battle. The negotiation was conducted through representatives of the Eastern Army, Kuroda Yoshitaka and Kuroda Nagamasa, who ensured Hiroye's cooperation by accepting hostages, a guarantee of his loyalty to their side. Fukubara Hirotoshi, Hiroye's senior retainer, played a key role in presenting these hostages as proof of their commitment to betray the Western Army. This covert agreement would prove instrumental in determining the outcome of the battle, as morale and trust within Mitsunari's ranks began to unravel even before the fighting began. And so on the morning of October 21st, 1600, the Tokugawa advanced guard unexpectedly collided with Ishida Mitsunari's troops. The two armies, concealed by thick fog from recent rains, initially did not know each other were there. They did not see each other, resulting in a brief moment of confusion as both sides withdrew to regroup. Once they were well aware of the enemy's presence, Mitsunari arranged his forces defensively, while Ieyasu positioned his troops to the south of the Western Army. After issuing final orders, the battle had begun. Traditional accounts claim that the conflict started around 8 a.m., but more recent research by Japanese historians suggests it was closer to 10 a.m. Either way, hopefully everybody had a good breakfast. They're certainly going to need it. Naomasa, who had played a key role in the Battle of Gifu Castle, led the first charge, commanding his 3,600 or so elite troops, the crimson-clad Red Devils. Now that's a cool name, isn't it? Right into the center of the Western Army. In modern terms, we have historian Watanabe Daimon, who indicates that Naomasa's role as Ichiban Yari, the first to attack, Ichiban meaning first, number one, suggests that the armies were already set in position before the initial clash. And so Fukushima Masanori joined in support of Naomasa's offensive, as Naomasa had been appointed by Ieyasu as the supreme field commander, responsible for the overall battle strategy. Leading with 30 crack spearmen, Naomasa pushed into the Western Army ranks, while Fukushima Masanori advanced to engage Ukita Hide's forces. The battle soon became a grueling deadlock. The chronicler Ota Gyuichi, who witnessed the fight firsthand, described it as friends and foes pushing each other, while gunfire thunders and arrows rain from the sky. Additionally, Spanish records note that 19 cannons from a Dutch vessel named De Liefde were used by Tokugawa's troops during the conflict. I'm sure they helped. Now do remember, at this time, cannons are a little bit new. They were first sort of used in a more famous context, 1453, when the Turks broke down the walls of Constantinople. But in other parts of the world, like Japan, they were just catching on. A lot of the troops, if they did not know what they were, would assume that this would be some kind of monstrous machine on the field that they could simply have no chance against. Very demoralizing. Imagine if you are meeting with that enemy force and all of a sudden the loudest peals of thunder you have ever heard start cracking out and people just start exploding around you. Now that's demoralizing. Well, back to the topic, I digress. During the Battle of Sekigahara, several key commanders from the Western Army defected to the Tokugawa side, and that was the significant thing that altered the course of the battle. If they hadn't have done so, things really might have been a lot different. So among these defectors, the most prominent was the aforementioned Tokugawa Hideyoshi, the nephew of Toyotomi Hideyoshi. His dissatisfaction with his uncle was skillfully exploited by Tokugawa, and ultimately his allegiance was swayed. There are two main theories about the timing of Hideyoshi's defection. The conventional one holds that Hideyoshi's defection took place during the battle itself. Though he had already pledged to switch allegiance to Tokugawa, he was reportedly hesitant and remained neutral for much of the fighting. According to this view, Hideyoshi only committed to the Tokugawa cause once noon came. So if we're looking at the modern estimates of the battle starting at 10 a.m., they would have been waiting for 2 hours, very nervously, to see if Hideyoshi was going to do as he said. And so it is said, as the battle intensified, Ieyasu ordered his gunmen, arquebusiers, as we call them in the old 17th century vernacular, to fire upon Hideyoshi's position on Mount Matsuo to compel him to act. Kind of a warning shot. This account is believed to have originated from the Edo period anecdotes about Hideyoshi. But we also have the other points of view. On the other hand, modern Japanese researchers suggest that Hideyoshi had already sided with Tokugawa before the battle had even began. Their conclusion of the modern scholars Jun Shiramine and Junji Mitsunari is based upon correspondence between Hideyoshi and Kuroda Nagamasa, as well as the initial deployment of Otani Yoshitsugu's troops, which indicates that the Western Army was aware and very well aware of Hideyoshi's planned betrayal. We may also add that the geographical distance between Hideyoshi's forces and the rest of the Eastern Army made it quite unlikely that Ieyasu's troops could have effectively fired arquebuses effectively or even audibly enough to force a decision. It's further argued by Yuichi Goto, another modern Japanese historian, that the story of Ieyasu firing at Hideyoshi's troops originated from Edo period secondary sources and not from eyewitness accounts. Now why would they do this? Well, possibly it is by pro-Tokugawa historians, purposely embellished to glorify Tokugawa's leadership at Sekigahara. I suppose we'll never know. Despite varying accounts, Hideaki's defection ultimately tipped the scales in favor of Tokugawa. His forces launched an overwhelming attack against the position held by Yoshitsugu, while Yoshitsugu's troops were simultaneously engaged by Todo Takatora and Oda Yuraku's forces. Following the defection of Hideaki, other Western Army commanders, including Wakisaka Yasuharu, Ogawa Suketada, Akasa Naoyasu, and Kutsuki Mototsuna, also switched sides. Really bad luck for the Western Army, don't you think? These commanders had reportedly reached agreements with Todo Takatora, the leading Eastern Army commander, days before the battle. I suppose they were probably waiting to see who was going to defect first. And well, once somebody else did it, it's much easier to follow suit. The first step is the hardest. Though it seems kind of at odds with that old idea of the samurai ethos, betrayal, being a turncoat, lying. Oh well, I suppose they would know what a samurai is meant to do better than I would. So we come to the head of the Mori clan, Mori Terumoto, who also chose to defect by remaining in Osaka Castle instead of joining the battle. That's a lot safer. Oh, I've been to Osaka Castle too many years ago. It's beautiful. You really should go. Afterward, his vassal, Kikawa Hiroye, quietly surrendered to Ieyasu. However, it is noted that this attempt at neutrality in exchange for retaining territory somewhat backfired. The Mori clan's domains were significantly reduced by Tokugawa after the battle, you see, despite some Mori troops having fought for the Western Army. Within the Mori clan, there were mixed sentiments about the defection. Mori Hidemoto, Terumoto's cousin, tried to support the Western Army, but his efforts were sabotaged by Hiroye, who obstructed Hidemoto's advance under the guise of attending to a meal. Okay. Hiroye similarly hindered a contingent led by Chosokabe Morichika from attacking Tokugawa forces, which once more was just another way of contributing to the Western Army's defeat. It's like all of their bad luck came all at once. One of the earliest vulnerabilities within the Western Army emerged along Ukita Hide's front. Hide's forces, engaged with Fukushima Masanori's troops, began to falter under sustained pressure due to the superior quality of Fukushima's soldiers. This difference in combat effectiveness may have stemmed from a prior rebellion within the Ukita clan, which led to the defection of many senior samurai vassals to the Tokugawa side. Consequently, Hide was forced to field fresh recruits and Ronin mercenaries to Sekigahara to fill up the gaps within his ranks. These recruits were ill prepared for prolonged combat against Fukushima's well-trained regulars, and they just didn't have the equipment. Despite outnumbering Fukushima's forces, the Ukita soldiers ultimately broke and collapsed under pressure. To the south, Otani Yoshitsugu found himself heavily outnumbered by Kobayakawa Hideaki's advancing troops. After being overwhelmed, Yoshitsugu chose to take his own life, and his troops soon retreated. This left the Western Army's right flank completely exposed. Fukushima Masanori and Kobayakawa Hideaki took advantage of this breach to roll the Western Army's flank. Realizing how dire the situation was, Ishida Mitsunari gave the command and began to withdraw his troops At the same time, Shima Sakon, another Western Army commander, faced an attack by Kuroda Nagamasa, who had maneuvered to the north to flank Mitsunari and Sakon's positions. In the end, Sakon was mortally wounded by a shot from an arquebus. After the capitulation of Sakon's forces, Shimazu Yoshihiro found himself and his troops surrounded by Fukushima Masanori and Honda Tadakatsu in the front, while Kobayakawa Hideaki attacked from the rear. The Shimazu troops managed to escape after suffering heavy casualties, with only 200 soldiers left, but even then they were pursued by Naomasa, who was eventually incapacitated by a shot from a rifle. The Western Army's defenses continued to crumble. It was chaos, especially with the absence of reinforcements and ongoing defections. It's estimated that the entire Battle of Sekigahara only lasted about 2 hours, from 10 a.m. till noon, contrary to the traditional Edo period belief that it took twice as long. The combined Eastern Army forces led by Tokugawa Hidetada and Sakakibara Yasumasa, with approximately 38,000 soldiers, were occupied with the siege of Ueda against Sanada Masayuki at the time of the battle. Simultaneously, around 15,000 Western Army troops were delayed at the siege of Tanabe in Maizuru, where they faced resistance from only 500 defenders, led by Hosokawa Yusai, whom many of the Western soldiers refused to attack out of respect. As a result, significant portions of both armies were unable to participate in the confrontation at Sekigahara. Another Western Army contingent under Tachibana Muneshige also failed to reach Sekigahara, being held up by Kyogoku Takatsugu during the siege of Otsu. Well, that's pretty good. I went 30 minutes or so without messing up one of the names. While following the Western Army's defeat, Muneshige remained at Osaka Castle. After learning of the Western Army's collapse, and with Mori Teramoto at Osaka Castle offering his surrender to the Tokugawa forces, Muneshige chose to withdraw and return with his army to his homeland in Kyushu. As soon as the Eastern Army's victory at Sekigahara was reported to Ogaki Castle, which at the time was under siege by one Mizuno Katsunari, the Western Army-affiliated commander Akizuki Tanenaga surrendered immediately, opening the gates for Katsunari. In response, Katsunari promptly requested a pardon for Tanenaga from Ieyasu, and lucky for him, it was granted. Got away with that one, didn't he? The Eastern Army's victory at Sekigahara marked a significant shift in political power, transferring authority from the Toyotomi clan to the Tokugawa clan. It was a victory that allowed Ieyasu to redistribute military ranks and lands. In the aftermath, he redistributed domains worth approximately 6.8 million koku, rewarding those whose loyalty had been instrumental in securing his triumph. Kobayakawa Hideaki, whose defection had been a key factor in Ieyasu's victory, received a pretty good reward, a domain worth 520,000 koku, covering parts of Bizen and Mimasaka provinces. However, Ieyasu offered only modest territorial increases to his loyal Shitenno Naomasa, Honda Tadakatsu, and Sakakibara Yasumasa, compared to the newer commanders and vassals he rewarded more generously. It is possible that this apparent disparity was due to the Shideno's declining extensive compensation. For the defeated Western army, approximately 87 daimyo lost their domains and power due to their support for Mitsunari. The Chosokabe clan, led by Chosokabe Morichika, was stripped of its title and domain in Tosa province, which was subsequently granted to Yamauchi Kazutoyo in recognition of his service. Several former Chosokabe retainers resisted the Tokugawa takeover of Tosa, leading Ii Naomasa to send reinforcements to assist Kazutoyo. Suzuki Hyoe, Naomasa's vassal, led an army transported by 8 ships to suppress the rebellion, ultimately pacifying the region in only 5 weeks, resulting in around 273 enemy deaths. That's not too bad. Well, on September the 17th, Ieyasu ordered an attack on the Sawayama castle in Omi province, Mitsunari's stronghold, led by Kobayakawa Hideaki. Most of the castle's troops were engaged at Sekigahara, leaving only 2,800 defenders under the leadership of Mitsunari's father, Ishida Masatsugu, and his brother, Masazumi. Despite initial resistance, the defection of several defenders, including Moritomo Hasegawa, forced the castle's surrender. The majority of Mitsunari's family, including Masatsugu, Masazumi, and Mitsunari's wife Kagetsuin, either died in combat or took their own lives afterwards. Due to Shimazu Yoshihiro's involvement with the Western army, Ieyasu prepared a large punitive expedition to Kyushu, led by his son Tokugawa Hidetada, with support from the armies of Kato Kiyomasa, Kuroda Yoshitaka, Nabeshima Naoshige, and the Tachibana clan. However, the campaign was halted when Shimazu Yoshihisa, the clan head, negotiated with Ieyasu. These negotiations, which lasted all the way until 1602, were supported by the intervention of Kiyomasa Yoshitaka and Tachibana Muneshige. Ultimately, the Shimazu were the only Western-aligned clan to avoid losing territory after the battle. On November the 6th, Konishi Yukinaga, Ankokuji Eke, and Ishida Mitsunari were captured, and they were all let go and enjoyed nice retirements in the countryside. No, I'm just joking. They were all executed. In 1603, Tokugawa Ieyasu was officially appointed shogun by Emperor Go-Yozei. This appointment marked the beginning of the Edo period, and the return of long-term stability to Japan following the chaos of war. But let's discuss a little bit of what happened after that, because, well, we've still got a little bit of time, don't we? We may as well. Following Tokugawa Ieyasu's appointment as shogun in 1603, several key events unfolded that cemented the foundations of Tokugawa rule and shaped Japan's landscape for over 250 years. After securing the title of shogun, Ieyasu began building Edo as his capital. Now, you probably don't recognize the name, but actually, Edo is the original name of Tokyo. Tokyo meaning Eastern capital. Of course, this initiated a transformation that would make it the political and cultural heart of Japan, a shift from Kyoto. While the construction of Edo Castle, an impressive structure symbolizing the power and stability of the Tokugawa regime, was a manifestation of Ieyasu's commitment to establishing his shogun's seat of power. And in 1605, Ieyasu voluntarily abdicated the title of shogun, passing it to his son Tokugawa Hidetada. And this was a strategic move. It allowed Ieyasu to retain substantial power and influence from behind the scenes while preparing his lineage for continued rule. By abdicating, Ieyasu ensured a smooth succession and stability, demonstrating that the Tokugawa Shogunate would be a dynastic institution. They were just getting started. Another key development was Ieyasu's efforts to centralize control over the daimyo, at least the ones that were left. He implemented the system known as Sankin Kotai, roughly translated to alternate attendance, later under Hidetada, which required daimyo to alternate between residing at Edo and residing in their home domains. This measure served a dual purpose. It financially strained the daimyo, limiting their ability to raise armies, and ensured their loyalty by keeping their families effectively as hostages in Edo. That's one way to do it, I suppose. The Sankin Kotai system was critical in preventing insurrections and maintaining peace throughout the Edo period. But in addition to all the political reshuffling, Ieyasu also focused on securing economic stability and building diplomatic relationships. He issued the Buke Shohato, a code of conduct that regulated the behavior of the daimyo and ensured that they would not challenge his authority. This decree was followed by the establishment of trade relations with foreign powers, particularly the Dutch, who were permitted to continue their trading activities under strict regulations, and only at the port in Dejima, in the province of Nagasaki, the city of Nagasaki rather. However, wary of foreign influence and potential threats to his power, Ieyasu also began to restrict the spread of Christianity in Japan, culminating in the expulsion of missionaries and the persecution of converts. This culminated in the 1614 edict that just completely banned Christianity, laying the foundation for the subsequent isolationist policies of the Tokugawa Shogunate, known as the Sengoku, or the closed country policy. Well, of course, that is a topic for another video completely, and a rather interesting one. The period of isolation is just as interesting as the period of opening up, when Matthew Perry decides to show up and point a gun at their head, open the damn door, or else. That's one way to get in. And then, of course, we have the Meiji Restoration, and we have modern history. Have I neglected Japanese history on this channel? I feel like I have. Maybe I should do more of it. Okay, I will do more of it then. Okay, and just like that, we get to the end of today's video. I hope it was everything that you thought it was going to be. I'd like to thank my top-tier supporters and patrons, Dark, Kerry, Kimberly Ember, Ben, Britt, Charles, Aaron, James, Jeffrey, Melissa, Scott, Stark Factory, Wendy, Jaden, Sherry, Jessica, Christine, Sally, Katiana, Fizabo, Christine, Legitmus, Maverick, Susan, Dr. Neuro Nerd, Cameron, Alexander, Daniel, Nicholas, JR, and Charlene. Thank you very much for listening, and I will see you in the next video. As always, good night, and lots of love to you all.